Morning everyone, and welcome to the WSP Expect Different podcast. And we are live from DCW on day 2 in London XL. Do not mind the noise in the background. There's a lot of people wandering around. Nothing we can do about that, but I think it adds to the value of the content because it's raw and real. So my name's Johnathan Munkley. I'm head of digital services for WSP, but I'm joined by 2 esteemed guests. So let's get them introduced. Over to you, Paul.
Morning.
What do you do and where are you from?
Yeah, sure. It's Paul Drayton. I have the privilege of leading the digital team in Laing O'Rourke.
Claire.
Hi, good morning. I'm Claire Callan. I'm part of the Building Technology Systems team at WSP, where we look at technology and buildings from all different perspectives.
This is probably the most serious conversation we've probably ever had, Claire. This is very serious. Normally we're chatting projects over coffee. But so we're here today to talk everything MMC, offsite, probably some digital, a little bit of smart, probably blend the whole thing together. MMC and offsite has been something that has always been thrown as the big fix to a lot of the construction industry's problem since I started my career, but I don't think it's really had a foothold over the 20 years I've been in the industry. I think it's starting to make progress. So what's been there? Let's start with the barriers to adoption. Is always a good kind of grounding point. What stopped MMC and offsite really kind of snowballed into the normal way of working?
I'm not sure everyone has it in their crosshairs as the way of doing things. It is different. It's breaking away from the norm, and I mean, it's a core part of our operating model, and I know it's absolutely at the heart of WSP's approach as well. So I think for people like us, it makes a huge amount of sense. And I think when you see it with your own eyes, whether it's you're making modules in a factory or how quickly it comes together, it's just a no-brainer. So I don't know, why hasn't it been? We're very lucky. We've got the appetite. We've been set a challenge from our founding father to really embrace it, and we have our own factories, so it's a no-brainer for us. Other people don't have access to that, so I think just access to the facilities could be part of it.
I think one of the challenges I heard early on was that delivering like this is often about scale and repeatability. So if you're building a set of houses that are all the same, the time you take to design is longer than the time it takes to build. So if you're only building 3 of them, it's not really worth the effort. But if you're building 40 of them, it starts to change it's all about being able to deliver at scale in some ways.
I had the honour of spending some time, was it Berkeley Homes, is that correct? With the CEO of Berkeley Homes, asking about their journey and the challenges they kind of had. They started with all have a factory, produce houses, and then projects got delayed because of planning. They had a factory full of houses, didn't know where to go. So they ended up trying to control the entire process, from buying land to designing. So you can see the challenges that people are facing. Like projects I've worked on through my career, the process of concept design through to planning through to then getting a contractor hasn't changed really. And that to me is probably the main barrier I've seen, because we hand over projects to contractors that are bespoke, architected, that you can't put in a factory.
One misconception maybe is that to get MMC working, it needs to be repeatable, and it absolutely doesn't. Everything coming out of a factory can be different. There's an economy of scale if you take that kit of parts approach, but we take a design from people like yourselves. We'll break it down how we are going to build it, and we're going to build it in bite-sized chunks that we can fit on the back of a wagon. So every part coming out is different. Now, if we then look at a high-rise, a hospital, where there is a greater level of repeatability, it's quicker, you get more economies of scale, but you can build anything offsite. We have a target that a minimum of 70% of our projects we believe should be built offsite for various reasons that maybe we'll come on to in a moment. But if we don't think we can achieve that, we need to think really hard, is this the right thing for us? Are we building this in the way that we believe is the right way to do construction?
What's always been the drivers for Langs, because I think even when I graduated, when did Langs build their factory? When was the strategic shift?
I mean, we've had the factory for kind of 15 years.
Yeah.
For me, the number one driver is safety and quality, actually, rather than cost. Schedule is there as well, but if you go into the factory and you see how people are building things, it's safe, it's not back-breaking work, they're in dry, warm conditions rather than being out on the river banks of the River Mersey. We were talking about Everton yesterday, driving rain and so on. It's a much better place to work. You've got much more control over the quality of what you're doing, and part of that is because you're looking down. It's right there. It's all achievable, and you can be building stuff 3, 4, 5, 6 months ahead of time. So it's an incredible way of protecting the schedule.
One of the things we've seen that's very interesting is we've had projects come in now that are in more rural locations, and they know they don't have the building skills in that area to build, so it would be too expensive for them to complete the project locally. But if they can build off-site and drive in the components, it's a much more cost-effective way to deliver, and so they can achieve a project that wouldn't otherwise be achievable.
It's a great point.
So we've not seen mass adoption in the construction industry, have we? Like, simple as that. And I think one of the key changes to the industry that is going to drive it is carbon. No matter what you said, the construction industry is wasteful. The statistics don't lie. 17% of everything bought on construction sites goes in the bin. 37% of landfill is from the UK construction site. Still in the UK, I think it's 40% if you look globally, which is just mad. Economically, it's a $600 billion figure that goes into landfill from construction sites. That's big numbers economically. What's the kind of waste reduction from off-site, like in terms of projects? Is there like metrics you've got where it's like we reduce waste by X if it's done through an off-site manufacturing process?
I don't have a measure to hand that we track off-site because we do it on every one of our projects, and we're constantly challenging what materials are we using. I think a lot of it is driven by the quality of the information. So for off-site MMC to work, you need a higher level of design maturity much earlier in the process. And if you've got that, you get greater surety over and certainty over your bill of quantities.
Yeah.
You get better certainty over getting it right first time, not having rework. To enable it, it needs a real focus on information.
There's lots of terms thrown around the industry that kind of put this in different categories. Off-site, DFMA, manufacturer's approach, kit parts. What terms should we be using as an industry?
For me, it's DFMA. It's design for manufacture and assembly, and they're the 3 key points to it. It's all about getting high levels of design maturity as early as possible. You then apply that into a manufacturing context, so we're going to be manufacturing things rather than constructing them. And once you've got something manufactured, that's when you can then assemble it out on site. And that's a fundamental change to the construction process, because you haven't got people constructing, you've got people assembling. Like a Meccano set.
We've heard it here first, guys. That is the term we need to use moving forward.
DFMA.
DFMA. So from now on, I'm only going to use the term DFMA.
There we go.
Nothing else. Maybe occasionally kit parts because I work for WSP, but definitely going to use DFMA moving forward forever.
You heard it here first.
We're going to create a standard, and that's going to be it. Going back to my career and the projects that I've worked on, probably the most successful and enjoyable collection of projects I've ever worked on as a professional was a data center program in the US. And the supply chain all worked together on every project from blank sheet of paper to handover, and they repeated that across all the projects. And that completely transformed the way they operated. It wasn't necessarily completely focusing on off-site or DFMA. Sorry, I've already broke my rule. Do we need to see more of that in construction rather than like disjointed, sporadic supply chains where you work from Reba 0 to 3 and then someone else comes in and... Do you know what I mean? Like, that is still a constant challenge for us.
100%. The most important thing about construction and about digital and construction is people. At the end of the day, I truly believe that. The more we can collaborate right the way through, from architects through to designers, out into the supply chain, and then actually through to the client as well, the better the outcomes. And a lot of that is based on trust, a lot of that is based on relationship and being able to unblock things, but also fundamentally to delight our customers no matter where you sit in that chain. But if we're trying to build something, deliver it with certainty, on time, in full, we have to have those relationships all the way through. Maybe I'd offer where you've had the most enjoyment for a project is where you had the best relationships.
100%.
Conversely, where you've had the most sleepless nights and you've lost the most hair, have been where that trust isn't there, the relationships lacking.
Well, and I think coming from a different industry, I spent 20 years in financial services. When you walk past a building site and it has one name on the outside, it looks like one team built a building, but actually when you come into the industry and you realize there's 80 or 90 different teams from the moment the architect gets on board, through the design stages, through the construction stages, through to the vendors that are involved, the number of parties you have to collaborate with is so huge that, you know, building those networks and those trusts to enable you to deliver is so important.
What levers can our industry pull to change that? Because there's a term I use a lot, the term pointy carrot, which is business case plus legislation. Because if you speak to a commercial developer, all they care about really is commercials and risk, and they're obviously driven by legislation as well. So is there something our industry needs to do, or the government needs to do, or needs to change from a legislation perspective or a policy perspective to help drive adoption of this tech, DFMA, on construction sites? Because if they can not do it and there's something cheaper, they'll probably not do it.
I think there is a challenge with that. You know, ultimately, it always all comes down to cost, right? And I get it. People have got, you know, shareholders to please and so on, and we will work with clients who, they have the appetite to do something differently. They believe in the power, the impact on delivery certainty, on safety, on quality that digitally enabled DFMA can offer, and we'll actively not, you know, work with companies where we think it's going to be a battle from day one. We were talking a minute ago about the importance of those relationships. If you're not going to get those relationships, then why would we do that? Is there a way of mandating that? I'm not sure. I think it's down to the likes of ourselves to come together, two clients, two forums like this, and really, extol the virtues and be able to demonstrate the benefit of doing it, and be able to quantify the benefit of doing it.
Just for the audience, I was actively nodding throughout all of that conversation.
I think, if you're looking to get legislation changed, often it's because people are advocating for it. And I think it's when people understand the benefit and the impact that DFMA can have on communities. Nobody wants to live next door to a building site for 4 years. If you're living next door to something that is a building site for 3 months with 2 to 3 weeks of very active assembly, that's quite different to living next door to a really noisy building site with lots of diggers and trucks coming and going for years on end. So I think it again comes around to marketing, that if you can get communities on board and advocating for it, the legislation will change, the developers will change.
I was watching the news yesterday morning, and this is really relevant to what you just said. The council is issuing a £400 compensation package to all the residents around the Grenfell site, because is it like 4 years overdue? Something ridiculously long now, isn't it? I don't know the reason for that, but that kind of triggers in my head of like, that's probably costing them a lot of money. Obviously not my area of expertise, and I don't really know much about that, but I did see it on the news yesterday about that being a challenge. So that's really relevant, to be honest.
It's a really interesting point you made, Claire. When I joined Lang's a couple of years ago, one of the first projects I went to was in the centre of Oxford, and we're building a new facility for the university there. Heritage city, everything's listed, narrow streets, etc. And it is the cleanest, most uncluttered, safest, quietest construction site I think I've ever been to. And that's not unique to Oxford because it's in Oxford and it's a requirement or a stipulation. That's just what you get when you're using DFMA and employing it. The contrast of that, like you say, you look at a typical site that's done in a typical way, but again, can you legislate that? Waze is an incredible way of navigating and helping me not just pick a route but avoid busy routes. But my mum will still use her 99p Atlas that I get her from W.H. Smith's every Christmas,
It's a valid point. Right, slight direction shift into my area of enthusiasm. So one of the discussions that happens a lot around DFMA projects is information and data. It's Digital Construction Week, so it's a very relevant topic. How do projects need to shift to a more data-driven approach, or when is the information required? When is the data needed in projects? I think the easier response is it's needed earlier. Probably has to be the starting point. But how are you both seeing that shift in projects on these kind of projects, the data being pulled into the start of jobs? That's pretty relevant to you, Claire, as well, being in your world of smart expertise. Yeah,
so my specialist area is smart building technology, so typically that's more about the finished building and the products we hand over to clients, what services they're putting in the building. But for us, a very early and important step in stage 2 is to sit down with the digital team Also with the client, because if it's a big client, they will often have a policies around their data and how they like to receive their data, and they might already be aligned with a particular data naming initiative that they might use. So we sit down very early in the project to make sure we're very clear what data naming are we going to use on all our drawings throughout the whole project, and then we make sure in the subsequent stages of the project that that's very clearly enforced, because at the end of the day, if the client wants a building where they understand what are all the sub-meters doing, what are my fans doing, is everything working as it should be? When the client wants that level of data, that conversation has to start early, and we have to make sure we drive consistency in how data is used throughout the project so as to achieve that.
I agree. DFMA will not work if you don't have the right data with the right people at the right time. And I know that's an obvious thing to say for any project, any stage of construction. But actually, when you're building things 3, 4, 5, 6 months ahead, and you're printing it in a factory and then you're shipping it to site, it has to be right. So I don't think about that as a challenge. I think about it as a consideration, because it's something that that everyone in the industry is talking about. It gives you an opportunity as well. So all the rich data that we can and should be procuring and collecting in the early design stages, and then through the construction process from the supply chain as well. That is the oxygen to feed the smart building. So a huge opportunity comes from getting the right information earlier. I think the challenge is, we're working with clients now that are talking about wanting a digital twin, a smart building, and we're halfway through construction. You're like, we're probably 4 years late speccing and actually collecting that data. So that's the opportunity that provides is huge. That will give you efficiency when you're running your building, utilization, energy usage. You're talking about the need for carbon earlier. If we've got the right information, we're collecting it in the right way, you get so many more freebies and add-ons, if you like. I think the other consideration is, if we're priming something, it's kind of up to us how we go about that. If we're in a JV and you're doing some of the big national infrastructure projects, and there's 3, 4, 5, 6 tier ones involved, the importance of getting those information standards defined up front, not just for us but for the client, are absolutely vital. And we've got projects I can think of where we've got those information standards agreed up front, and it's been simple and effortless and comfortable. And there's other parts of the project where we haven't, and it's been a bit like the Wild West, and it's been hard for everyone.
I think there's also an aspect around the client demand, and one thing I think that's positive is we're seeing standards like, for example, Neighbours, which is all around measuring building energy consumption in operation. So not just did you build something that should work well, but actually when it goes into operation, is it working effectively? And so we're seeing those become much better known across clients, and they're coming in asking for it at the start. I think that probably does help that they're asking for it early and not sort of suddenly halfway through thinking, oh, that would be nice.
I did a presentation yesterday on why ISO 19650 is only the beginning of information management on projects, and compared adoption of ISO to construction productivity. And basically there's been no productivity gains really. Been some very small, but I think the basis of my presentation was that it comes down to people and collaboration, and the standard is such a small part of that.
The ISO 19650 piece is really interesting. So it's easy to go, okay, that is for the information management team, or the BIM manager, or the digital engineer. And I think it's a great starting point to make sure that we're all on a level playing field in our trade. But actually we're seeing real value in exposing the wider business, the design managers. They need to understand what's the importance of this in our team. In procurement, they need to understand when we're asking for all these things in the contract, all this data, and it to be in the mid-hip and in the loin in a certain way with a certain coding structure, there's a really important reason why we're doing that. And so there's a huge education and literacy piece. So very simple in principle, but as you said, it's all about people, it's all about change, and actually that's probably the bit where I don't think as an industry we're investing enough time and energy at the moment.
And it can make all the difference when it's enforced. I was told a story yesterday that horrified me, right? As I said, one of the things we do in stage 2 is we define very early what is the data naming standard going to be across this project. We make sure it's socialized well, and we make sure from there all of our drawings pick up on it. And somebody told me a story, I don't know who it is in the industry. Oh yeah, we do that at the beginning of stage 2, but then we draw whatever we want on the drawings. And I was like, that's nonsense. So
whoever that person is, Claire is coming for you. Run for your life.
what I'm very pleased with is, the teams we work on, we have amazing document controllers who do the grunt work of making sure that's enforced throughout the project. And, I'm so grateful to them because that's what makes our project successful.
So what do we think is stagnated construction productivity? And it's always a question that probably has 15 different ways to attack it then. Because DFMA is definitely one of the key pillars to improve construction productivity. The statistics of projects that take kit apart to DFMA approach, the numbers don't lie, do they? They're quicker, they're faster, they're built faster. It's simple as that. So what have been the blockers over the last 20 years that have stagnated the construction productivity index? It is globally as well, it's not just the UK. I mean, I can see lots of cogs moving in brains there, but and it's a big, wide, broad question.
This is probably another podcast in its own going. Access to data, and that's quite broad in itself. I think designers having access to data, that coming to the contractors, and then it really importantly going down to the people that are really earning the pennies for all of us, the guys and girls at the workplace who are actually delivering, giving them access to design data, material data, simple, easy visualization of where something should go, visual work instructions, and then having quality sign-off processes in at the tip of their fingertips rather than having to go back to the office. That's where I see huge opportunity still. There are inroads being made there, but every project you go to is doing it to a different level. So I'd offer access to data right the way through the supply chain.
I think for me there's a very interesting tension that's always ongoing around the planning process. I was reading a piece of research last year by an American researcher who looked specifically at roads projects over the course of 100 years, and they were able to identify that at the point where planning became a thing, there was in the early 60s in, I think it was California, there was a project being built, and it was the first time they allowed for community consultation. So it was the first time the community could come and look, but it was also the first time then that a developer had to kind of robustly provide information back to validate what they were doing and get that planning and approval. And I think it's something that has kind of spiraled since then, and there's a very heavy cost in projects in being very clear up front what we're doing, how we're doing, what the impact will be. And I think there will always be a tension in society about what is the right level of interrogation, because I think at the moment we've gone a little bit too far. And I think what we're seeing politically at the present is someone, coming back to a more appropriate level of interrogation before sign-off. Because when it's too hard to get planning, developers just don't bring forward projects.
Valid. I think that drives a lot of the developers wanting to keep fees down in early stages and not wanting to appoint people in early stages because they want to reduce their risk profile, basically.
And ironically, if you look at McLeany's curve, the more level of effort you put in up front, the greater that is. The lower the defects, the lower the design change you're going to have later down the line. So you've got this unhealthy tension where actually we as contractors and probably you guys as designers would love to see more investment up front to get it, to get the level of information high. But that relies on a really constructive conversation with the clients.
Yeah.
And it's not that we're going to spend more. Ultimately, we're going to spend less, and we're going to be de-risking things. But the cost profile will change, and it has to left shift in there.
It's just a constant conversation, that isn't it? And it's I would love to see the shift to just employ the right people earlier and get things fixed and sorted. So, if you're listening to this podcast and it's something you want to learn more about, or it's an area of a topic you want to really get into, you might have no knowledge, some knowledge, what's the first step you should take as a professional, either engineer, architect, QS, graduate, undergraduate, to kind of get into the world of DFMA and kit parts? Like, where can you learn about this?
Come and apply for a job at Laing O'Rourke.
You've heard it. We've got lots of jobs going at Lang's, guys.
It's a really interesting question. It is showing up more through higher education. We're very privileged to support a number of undergraduate degrees, and it's something that we teach at those. Exeter and Cambridge, to call out a couple. I think you are seeing more of a pull through contractors and through designers such as yourselves as well. And coming to something like this, and there are various forums where people can get involved. Jump onto Google
Over to you, Claire. Over to
I
you.
would definitely recommend DCW for next year to anyone who wanted to learn more. I think one positive thing is when we look at, we're always talking about skills and how do we bring young people in and how do we get people interested in the industry. And you don't walk into a classroom full of 14-year-olds and try and explain information requirements to them. But if you walk in and pull up some Roblox or some Minecraft and actually start designing spaces, you can get people quite involved. So I'm excited that those platforms being big will get people involved in actually how can I build and design in the real world. So I'm positive about the future at that point.
So as a closing point, is DFMA the future of our industry? Because I think it aligns to so many objectives we have of carbon reduction, cost reduction, quality and safety. So if you're joining the industry, if you become an expert in DFMA, it's probably going to give you a better career, I would expect.
It's interesting.
Because I did it with digital. I was like, right, digital is going to give me a stronger career than just being a traditional architect. And so I've deviated.
I think I guess I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective. I don't think it's the future. I think it's the now.
The now.
And like I say, every one of our projects, will have a minimum of 70%. Be it Everton Football Stadium, be it a hospital, be it Old Oak Common. These are all projects that are being done with 70% or more offsite. So it's not the future, it's the now. I think we'll see wider adoption across other designers and other contractors, and I think we have to. You look at that skills gap, you look at the demand for buildings and infrastructure globally, we can't keep doing things the way we have. There simply isn't enough capacity in the system to be able to do it. And people won't want to come and do it in these old ways.
Any closing remarks, Claire?
I think it's brilliant. Bringing the cost down, we need to build so much more in the UK, and so being able to do it in an effective and efficient and safe way, fantastic.
Well, on that point, I think it's probably a great place to close. So thank you very much to our guests. Thanks to Paul.
Thank you.
I've been Jonathan, and we've been joined by Paul and Claire. Thank you very much, everyone.